All right, so why Georgia? So Georgia, we decided to focus on Georgia in this week's webinar because it's one of the first states to lift stay-at-home orders. And so it can really give us some insight into what can recovery start to really look like in a geography that has lifted stay-at-home orders. And so what we're going to start off today, I didn't know very much about Georgia except from what the news is telling me. And so I kind of took all those news stories together and put together a timeline of how stay-at-home, of the COVID-19 pandemic and how that's laid out in Georgia. So what I have here is we have over 1.5 million polygons in our library, so hand-drawn locations. And we took all the retail, big industries, retail, restaurants, QSRs, salons and spas. I'll break it down later on. And looked at if people are going there, what are the foot traffic trends there? And here is a summary of that data. So what we see here in the beginning is looking at pre-COVID-19, so March 6th to March 19th. We see with around March 13th is when the state of emergency was put in nationally, and we start to see a decline in traffic during that time. But it's March 19th when Georgia decided to start putting local cities in Georgia started to put in local stay-at-home orders.
Yeah, I think what we saw, Evelina, was before our governor put the stay-at-home order, he really decided that he was leaving up to the local governments to put in different orders. So for example, obviously the city of Atlanta around March the 19th put down their order to stay at home, and a lot of counties started following suit. So that's kind of why you see that drop off between March the 19th and April the 3rd, where there wasn't, this other big cliff when the governor came out, because most Georgians were already staying home.
Yep. And from March 19th to when they lifted stay-at-home orders, April 24th, we see pretty much steady traffic. People are staying home, I guess, because I know that the orders in Georgia are not incredibly strict as some other states, right?
Yeah, I think, the orders here were maybe a little bit different than especially California, because you and I do talk a lot about the differences. Our beaches were open, they were closed, they were open again. Our state parks never closed. A lot of them were open. Golf courses were still open. Everything was being done with different social distancing concepts in place depending on where we were going. So there was some differences there, and there was differences in non-essential versus essential workers as well in Georgia versus a lot of other states. So what we've seen versus what you guys have been through is a little bit different, I would say.
Yeah, and looking at some of the other metropolitan cities like Los Angeles compared to Atlanta, I think there are a lot more dips and ups and downs in our traffic.
Yeah, I think ours was pretty steady after the governor issued his orders.
And then now we're starting to see a little bit of an uptick here.
Right.
So on April 24th, it was announced that non-essential businesses, including gyms, barbershops, massage therapy places, are allowed to open. And then they also started to allow on April 27th, dining services at restaurants, and then private social clubs were allowed to open too. And then overall, the stay-at-home order was lifted on April 30th.
Right. I think there are specific regulations around each and every one of these industries on how they can open, social distancing that people have to stay, how far they have to stay apart. And I think as we get into this, Evelina, the data is really going to show, especially when we talk about gyms versus barbershops and salons, just how slow this progression is going to be And I think you and I will probably harp on it maybe a little bit today, which is how that they were not going to see we don't see these big spikes yet. Not to say they might not come, but people are being extremely cautious here in Georgia still.
Well, that's good to hear, because I know that I know there's been a little bit of a decline in the cases of COVID-19, but I think the recommendations put out by the White House haven't all been met yet in terms of whether you should open or not. So I think being careful here is good to hear. So a reminder to everybody in the audience, we do have that question and answer button up in the Zoom in the taskbar. So if you want to get some ground truth knowledge about Georgia, or if you have any questions about what we're showing here, please use that Q&A. All right, so let's look at where people are going. So we did see that that uptake there, and let's see what different industries people are going to. So first, I wanted to do this analysis by looking at where we're seeing the most activity change. So this map here and the stats here show you what has been the percent change in foot traffic or in traffic in these metro areas during and after stay-at-home orders. So we see that Chattanooga, the metro area of Chattanooga, is at the top of this list. And generally what we see here is border towns are at the top of the list with showing the most traffic.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you look at that, Evelina, and you look at the states that border Georgia, and you compare the different orders that are in place versus Georgia, and the different businesses that might be open as well, not in your home state, that you could potentially be traveling to here in Georgia, where you couldn't go to a salon in one of the other states. Now maybe you kind of do need that haircut, right?
Yeah, actually, we did do a deep dive into this, and it's going to be a blog post up on the COVID-19.ubermedia website, where we look at what percentage of out-of-state visitors are some of our retailers and the border towns seeing. So it's interesting. People are crossing the border to get those haircuts. Well, we also did a deep dive into per sector traffic. And I think to understand what the lift of stay-at-home orders, the impact of the lift of stay-at-home orders are on each of these industries, we really need to understand how has COVID-19 impacted these industries in general. So we picked the major ones here. We have grocery stores, eating places, retails, hotels, spa, salons, fitness and recreation centers, and apparel. So a mix of essential and non-essential businesses. And what we did first is we quantified what the pre-COVID-19 numbers look like. And then we compared it to stay-at-home order periods. And what you have here in this chart is how much of a hit these businesses and these sectors took because of COVID-19.
Yeah, you see, you really get a good aspect of the places that were completely closed down there, right, Evelina? If you look at the spas, the fitness and recreation, apparel and entertainment numbers, they completely dropped off. They were pretty much zeros. I think what you're seeing in there, they're not zeros, is because if you take, for example, a fitness center, right? They still had employees going in there. They were doing a lot of work, a lot of cleansing. They were doing online classes. So you still see that the percentage change isn't 100, but it is basically closed.
Yep, yep. Yeah, and if you look at, then we compare this to, we compare these numbers to understand what the lifting of stay-at-home orders and how that has changed traffic. What we see is then some of these businesses opening back up, right?
Right, you see them opening back up. If you look at it, it's really interesting. Eating places, back, they increased by 21%. Obviously, here in Georgia, we're going to get into this a little bit later, but what we found was a lot of the brands and a lot of the independents still haven't opened up.
Yeah.
There might be doing some they might be doing some pickups, some Door Dashes, Uber Eats, but they still haven't really opened back up, especially all the sit down dine-ins. But there has been a number of spas and salons and barbershops that have opened back up. And I think one of the reasons maybe people are a little more comfortable there is you can set your own appointments. Some of them are extremely cautious of only allowing one stylist or two stylists in to the shops themselves. So that could be a couple of reasons why people are going there. And, the hair thing too, right?
Yeah, I was like, are you heading over to the barbershop, or do you even go to a barbershop?
Fair enough.
Well, I know for me, I was actually supposed to get a haircut right before all of this had started. And so I just missed that one appointment, and here I am, like my hair is growing way, way longer. And I call it, I saw Chris on webcam one day, and I'm like, oh, so that's the color of your hair.
That's true. You've never seen it before, right? It's been years since we worked together.
Well, we also see, I know fitness and recreation. I'm dying to go back to the gym. I know there are big movie goers out there, avid movie theater goers who are dying to get back into movie theater. But I think because of the hit of COVID-19 on them, and also because people aren't really jumping up and down to get to there, even though they want to, we're not seeing a very big jump in their traffic.
Yeah. So, for example, the gym I go to here, they were planning to open, and then after looking at the regulations put down by the governor, it was very tough to enforce them. The social distancing part of having so many people within so many square feet of one another. Then just the cleansing of the equipment, the sharing of the equipment. You don't see a lot. There's no group classes allowed, so a lot of CrossFit gyms and whatnot aren't open yet. And then all those other aspects of daycare in the gyms, the showers in the gyms, things like that have a tremendous impact on whether or not people really want to get back there as quickly as they want. And they have done a pretty good job of the online classes. So it'll be interesting to track fitness over the next little while to see what that return is going to look like and what that curve really does look like.
Yeah, definitely. I think the smaller boutiques are probably going to see a little bit more business in the bigger gyms, perhaps, because the bigger gyms, you have to be more cognizant of social distancing. In the entertainment world, I know that they opened up, they allowed movie theaters, they allowed bowling alleys to open up. But I read an article about theaters, how they ended up laying off a lot of the staff. And so even though stay-at-home orders are lifted, they're not ready to open yet.
Right. And there's challenges across the board in entertainment, especially in the category we're calling eating places. We'll talk a little bit that later on about the staffing issues that we see and we're hearing about.
Yep. Well, I wanted to also dive into some places that have opened and looking at that foot traffic. So what are some of the places that did open, and how much of an uptick did we really see in their foot traffic? So first, I looked at entertainment. There is the Main Event Entertainment and the Brunswick Zone. The Main Event Entertainment is more of your like go-to, I guess, arcade area, right? Arcade facility. And then Brunswick is a bowling alley, right? They own a bunch of bowling alleys. And what we see here is, yeah, there is a little bit of an increase in traffic, but it's not that dramatic.
No, it's not dramatic at all. And from what I understand, what I've read, especially with bowling alleys, not all the lanes are open. Again, they're adhering to social distancing orders by the governor. So you do see a little uptick there. Probably some parents who've had the kids in the house for a couple of months need to get out and have a little bit of space, a little bit of breathing. But again, like we talked about throughout our conversation, Evelina, the uptick is going to be slow.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though we see a 50% increase with salon and spas, when we dive into brand level, the uptake is there, but it's not everybody. It's still in recovery.
Yep, definitely agreed. Mm-hmm.
Supercuts, famous hair. We also put in massage envy here.
Yep.
You had some really interesting insights with massage envy in terms of.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see that, a massage envy has an uptick right now. But if you really start to think about it a little bit, they do have an interesting business model. They have subscriptions that they offer to their clientele. They do have drop-ins as well. But you have to think that, there are medical reasons as well why people need massages for bad backs and whatnot, and other ailments. So some folks might not even have a choice but to go back to get those massages and get back moving again. So it is interesting to look at subscription-based organizations such as Massage Envy to see, a lot of them have put memberships on hold or extended credits. But as Georgia turns around, when they turn around and say, okay, it's safe to come back, are we going to see spas or massage envies or other subscription-based businesses spike? So it'll be interesting to follow some of these brands.
Yep. Well, I think we're in the next section here. We're actually going to deep dive into one of these sectors, and that's what Chris had alluded to earlier, eating places. And we're going to look at what this new normal looks like. And with this section, I'm actually going to start us off with a poll. And I want to understand, I know QSRs are very easy to get to, so I want to understand, in the past week, how many times have you visited a QSR or a drive-thru to a QSR? And it looks like I'm getting some Q&As coming in, so let me see while this poll is happening. All right, let me go through this poll and then I'll come back to the question that we got in the Q&A. All right, so this is interesting, Chris. And maybe it speaks to the audience we have here. Let me share our results. And so it looks like 50% of the audience have not visited a QSR in the past week.
Okay.
But a quarter of them, more than a quarter of them have visited once. And then we have one person that's admitting that they've gone 5 or more times.
Yeah, interesting results. I think as we go through it, depending on where everybody is right now, will really dictate, your answer to that question as well.
Have you been to a QSR in the past week?
I have, actually. I think, earlier this week, it was on Tuesday, I ran over to Chick-fil-A for lunch and picked something up by their curbside.
All right. They are very efficient there, so.
Yeah, they are.
Very good experience. All right, so let's dive into QSRs. So with this analysis, what we did is we took all of our polygons in that fell under eating places. So restaurants, quick service restaurants, casual dining places. And we looked at their foot traffic and calculated the average daily visitor counts by brand. And we took those visitor counts and we analyzed what the changes were compared to pre-COVID-19, during stay-at-home orders, and post-stay-at-home orders. And what we found here is a ranking, or what we did here is a ranking. And we took all the brands that were in our library, mostly national and some regional brands, and we ranked them by their average daily visitor counts. And what we see here is Chick-fil-A top No surprise there, right, Chris?
No surprise with Chick-fil-A. You know, it's a home market. They dominate the market. They're really efficient with getting people in and out and the dine-in when it was open. So no real surprise.
And
And
we got
McDonald's
to,
as well. Obviously McDonald's. And
yeah.
I don't think there's too much of a surprise with this list here.
No, it's a mix of QSR and casual dining. And again, this is before stay-at-home orders, so people were still allowed to go out and dine within Olive Garden, go to Texas Roadhouse, Cheddar's. So it's a mix of casual dining and QSRs and some of those big brands that are associated with those sectors. So comparing their average daily visits to and how they've changed during stay-at-home times, we see some interesting changes here. So we see actually the casual dining categories here have dropped off of the top 10 list.
Right. Yeah. And you know, I don't think that's too much of a surprise, Evelina, when you really think about these casual dinings and the amount of business that's driven through the dining rooms and through the bars that are in some of them, right? You know, they also have reduced hours when it comes to delivery and it comes to pickup. So like some of these had pickup before and delivery, some of them did not. And then layering in reduced hours, it's not a surprise to see each of these have been knocked down at least 10 points.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you have Texas Roadhouse and Olive Garden kind of switch places here. So it's interesting to also see those who have had to change their business models to not be focused on dining in, how they've kind of adapted to COVID-19 if they decided to still have delivery or takeout.
Right, I think everybody they were kind of like on the fence about it, right? Whether or not to do it. So I think a really interesting one was Cracker Barrel here. You know, Cracker Barrel, from what I can still recall, is still closed. So it's no surprise to me that they've dropped even further down. And I think one of the other issues with a lot of the restaurants, the casual dining restaurants that have not been open during this time or with limited hours for just drive-through, is they have staffing issues. Yeah. Right? They have a lot of staffing issues. They have supply chain issues. You know, a lot of the workers have been laid off. So bringing those all back, it's all a part of the equation. And, you know, for the owners of these casual dining restaurants, they really have to look at how quickly do they staff up? What does that supply chain look like? What can we get into the restaurants? And how many folks are allowed in the restaurant? That's a big issue for a lot of them, especially here in Georgia with the rules. And if I'm not mistaken, it states 6 people within 500 square meters. So, you know, that's not a big, that's a big space for only 6 people. And if you have a small restaurant, why would you open, right? If you have a smaller footprint. So all these decisions still have to be taken into consideration before you open. And that's why I think you see companies like Cracker Barrel, Texas Roadhouse still down there. Olive Garden's opening up some here and there, but you know, nobody's fully open yet.
Well, let's talk about those Cinderella stories. So these casual dining places have popped off of the top 10 lists. And what we see are actually other QSRs that had previously been pretty low on the rankings have jumped up into the top 10 lists. And the whole thing is now, the whole top 10 list is all QSRs.
Yeah, you know, I think, Evelina, I don't think this is too surprising to anybody, no. Right? It's, you know, we kind of thought this would be the case. I think we're going to get a deep dive into Sonic, but, you know, when you look at the adjustments some of these QSRs have made over the last 2 months, and looking at Chick-fil-A, for example, that stayed ranked #1 here in Georgia, they've done a lot of work around social distancing, around optimizing how they're getting people through the drive-through, expanding curbside, adopting DoorDash and adopting Uber Eats. So there's a lot of work that they've done to try to keep their sales moving. And here's another interesting aspect of this, and maybe this is just my own theory as to, why the QSRs are doing much better than casual diners, or casual dining is taking time to reopen, is if you look at the workers at QSRs tend to be younger, college students. They tend to be high school students. They're not in school. They have more time on their hands. They don't have the same staffing issues that you would find with a casual diner, to the degree anyway. And that's another reason why you see this ranking change. And quite frankly, people just don't want to get out of their car very much either, right? So it's not a surprise. And if we look at Sonic over the next couple of slides, it's going to be really interesting to show how Sonic jumped in their business model overall, and how they can maybe, capitalize a little bit on what they've seen.
Yeah, we had somebody in the Q&A ask what jumped into the number 5 slot, and that's Sonic, right? From 22 up to number 5.
Yeah,
it's a pretty big jump.
It's a massive jump. It goes to their business model. If we look at the next few slides, Evelina, we can talk a little bit more. I'll talk a little bit more about their business model and why they might be able to capitalize on what's going on.
Yeah, and so with that, transitioning here, I did this analysis using our Vista property reports, because Chris looked at this data and we talked about Sonic, we talked about what's changing, what could possibly be changing, and I'm like, we do have our Vista property report that we can pretty readily pull data from. And so I showed this in our last webinar. It was actually, we launched it last week, so it is available for everybody to go in and find out quick information about their location using mobile location data. What I did here is for the Sonic location that we decided to look at, I ran 2 Vista property reports. And one, what I did is I went in and polygoned the Sonic, so you can see that polygon here. And then I click Run Report for the pre-COVID-19 time, so before COVID-19. And what I came back with is a bunch of visitation information on this Sonic location before COVID-19. Now, I also wanted to be able to do this comparison against post during stay-at-home orders and post-stay-at-home orders. So I also ran the same report for the Sonic for post-COVID-19. So what I did here, I know last time I went back and forth between these 2 windows, and I was reminded by a product manager that I can go in and actually just export the image and put this into a nice deck and be able to do this study pretty readily outside of the Vista property reports. So I did just that. I exported these images and I brought them back into this deck here so we can analyze the differences between before stay-at-home orders and during and after stay-at-home orders. So we looked at a Sonic drive-in in Calhoun, Georgia. And what we pulled here are the common evening locations of the devices that we saw in the polygon of that Sonic. So these are customers to that Sonic location. And what we did then is pull their common evening location. So where does their phone sit mostly during the evening hours? And what does that mean in terms of origin points for that location? And so if we look at pre and post stay-at-home orders, what we have here in the before time period is that it's pretty spread out, but most of the visitors are mostly in this middle part here, pretty close proximity to the Sonic itself. But with the during and after stay-at-home orders, we do still see this spread out, but we actually see more clusters around this Sonic location. And if I look at this as a mobile trade area, so using mobile devices, mobile data to create your trade area, we can see how that has changed that trade area, looking at pre and post stay-at-home orders.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the capture rate that they're getting off to the east, Evelina, and I think that is partly due to their concept themselves. For folks that are on the phone that aren't familiar with Sonic, they're a very low touch QSR. What I mean by that is they do a lot through the drive-thru, but they're also drive up, you know, kind of that 50s drive up diner style where they don't come out on roller skates, but you know, you press a button, you order the food, and they bring it out to your car, and you can sit in your car and eat it. So it's an extremely low touch concept. You know, they do have some tables in the middle of a lot where you can go and eat as well, but it's extremely low touch. And if I was Sonic, I would be trying to capitalize upon the new social distancing rules, how folks can still come to Sonic, you know, look at, you know, the folks that I've captured and really determine, you know, if these are the behaviors and attitudes that are changing, come to Sonic, because we're well aware and already understand what low touch could be doing. And then, you know, and we'll get into it in a second as well, but that trade area expansion is huge as well. It could mean that I could open up another unit where I didn't think I could open one up, right, without cannibalizing too much. So there's a lot that the mobile data can do for you very simply through the tool that Evelina just said, when you look at before and after, and especially over the next six months here in Georgia.
Yeah, and in terms of marketing too, marketing to these new customers, making them loyal Sonic customers to this location.
Right, exactly. Excellent point.
Great, so I'm going to throw this one to you, Chris, because
Sure.
I think you put this together or you summed it up really well in terms of what can mobile data do for during the recovery period for these businesses?
Yeah, you know, mobile data is about as real time as we can get, right? And I know there's some lags in our data, but it really will help us understand the changes of consumer preferences and behaviors over the next 6 months, year, 18 months, however long this goes on for. You can really understand through that Sonic example of, you know, how has my customer base changed? How has my trade area changed? You know, how often are people coming? What is really happening with, you know, my competition? Is my competition suffering? Are their trade areas shrinking? Is there an opportunity for me to kind of swoop in and get a customer that I didn't think I could get before? So utilizing not only mobile data, but bringing in, like Evelina mentioned, your marketing team to the equation, and marketing to areas that maybe you didn't do local marketing to before will help you create a larger, more loyal customer base in what we're trying to figure out as the new normal.
Well, Chris, I want to thank you for joining us in this webinar today and giving us the underground knowledge of what's going on in Georgia. Thank you for your time, and
Great.
hopefully I'll see you soon after these stay-at-home orders, right?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Evelina. Bye-bye.